All right, so DBQ number 2 was all about Unit 4. So Unit 3 and 4 are both going to be kind of the time period that we haven't necessarily covered in the review yet. The purpose of this is so that way we can kind of keep looking at DBQs after like we are completed with everything and look back on them. So the unit guides 1 and 2 were this week. You had the quiz on them, so hopefully you actually took the time to do that at some point this week. Or I'm sorry, we'll take the time to do that at some point this week. But you should have already completed those guides. So the reason why the DBQs for the last 2 weeks have been on Unit 3 and 4 is because, in all honesty, you can look things up, but the skills that are required in order to write these kind of transcend all of the content, right? So whether you know the information or not isn't necessarily as important as it is in order for you to build an argument. The only things that you would even really require that information from outside is really just for the outside evidence parts. So I'm going to go through the DBQ now. It's all about Unit 4, and this one is all about life in the Americas after the Europeans arrived. So Unit 4, I put some information at the top here. Just read it. It's the same stuff from last week. The prompt for this week was develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which the arrival of maritime empires transformed life in the Americas from 1450 to 1750. If your paper did not focus on the Americas, you probably are going to have an issue, right? So it's the extent to which life in the Americas was transformed, right? So it has nothing to do really with the Europeans. It's everything about life in the Americas, all right? So this could really be argued as a causation or a change over time essay. If you wanted to do a comparison, you could, but you would have to compare everything from before they arrived to after. And doing that for every single topic could be a little bit tedious, but certainly could also be done. These are just the easiest ones to look at in terms of like how did things change, because we're really looking at change over time and what caused those things to change. So we're here, right? For context, there's two different ways that you can go with contextualization here. Before or after, or both, I guess I should have said in there as well. So you can explain how the Aztec, the Inca, and the Maya all lived before the arrival of Europeans, including their food, technology, and social structures. Or you could discuss how the changes made during this time period affected the Americas long after the time period. This will probably be most successful by discussing the revolutions that occurred there in the following 150 years. So the time period ends at 1750. Well, a lot of things happen after 1750, right? We end up with all of the revolutions occurring throughout the Americas, and also the Caribbean. But you can really get the contextualization point here by focusing before or after, right? Or even making the real big bridge in between and covering both, which would actually move you more towards that complexity point as well. If you can kind of establish what life was like, how they changed it, how those changes manifested later on. That would be an extremely detailed and super well done essay if you have the time to do it, right? So all of these are just some examples. When it comes to contextualization, you want to make sure that it's specific enough and provides enough information about how life changed, and especially the way in which it transformed things outside of this time period, right? So life pre them coming is an easy way to set it up, but also how these changes lasted over time can also work for the context point. For your thesis, so I wrote in here, I said, this will be extra long because I'm going to include everything. I think you can get the point if you argue any one of these topics, right? So I've kind of told you guys before in a thesis, try to pick two. That way, if you mess up on one, at least you can make everything towards your argument on the other one. But in all honesty, if you argued any one of these things, you're probably going to be okay. There may be other things outside of this realm. I just didn't necessarily think of them. So for a more individualized response, if you're like, would this count, please feel free, send me a message. Stop in. Last week, I annotated all over people's DBQs and sent them out to them if they wanted me to do that. I have no problem doing that with yours as well. So please just reach out, start contacting me. We need to actually get better at this stuff. And because there's only X amount of time that we can actually meet about it, take advantage of that time that we have. So any one of these things. So the arrival of Europeans altered life in the Americas in an extraordinary way. Make sure that you always address to what extent life was changed, right? So make sure that you address to what extent life was changed. So I said in an extraordinary way and then here are all of the options that I could kind of think of here. Bringing in new forms of livestock, food crops, cash crops, modes of transportation, religions, slavery, government, philosophy, weapons, and language that would all be lasting changes, forever changing the continent, right? So basically including all of these things and then saying, hey, here's the lasting changes part that would forever change the continent, right? So saying that these all are a gigantic change and to a massive extent altered life in the Americas. So, and by the way, these are things that I thought of, but if you wanted to make the argument for weapons, that's a really hard argument based on these documents. Even because of the way the documents are shaped, you kind of want to pick two that are hit on it because in all reality, the documents are pretty specific to certain things, right? So document 1. For sourcing, so as a novel written by a scholar some 400 years after the fact, we know that this was written in an academic audience. It's also clearly meant to speak about heritage and thus is meant to reveal a connection that was formed long ago and yet still remains. If you wanted to look up more about the author or about kind of the reason for the book being published or anything like that, you could have, but ultimately realizing that it's written for an academic audience and it's more or less trying to just show the connection to a heritage that this author herself has, right? So it said the author was of Mexican descent. So it builds to that. It shows a personalization and it shows a controlled effort to kind of sway the audience one way or another, right? So evidence that you could have used in this document, I said the relationship between a Mexican goddess and the Virgin Mary of Catholicism is a great way to show blending of religion in the Americas and the lasting impact it had. It also shows that the people can communicate from locals to the European bishop in a language that continues to be spoken there today, right? So obviously they were able to communicate with one another, so it shows language. It also shows religion kind of being blended from one into the next, right? For outside evidence, you can mention the levels of Christianity in Latin America. Latin America is by far and away the highest rates of Christianity in the world. It's not even close. The current Pope is from Latin America. He's from Argentina. Finding other miracles that have happened in Mexico, right? Identifying another incident where this happens. The key here is all of this outside evidence you need to then connect to your thesis, right? All of these outside evidence points only count if you actually tie them into your argument, right? So if your argument is all about how, religion was shaped, in Latin America and became a very Christian place, well, you have to kind of use outside evidence that also talks about that, right? For document 2, information on the author and novel are extremely limited. I would not source this document. That's just a reality. So for evidence, sorry, I just got that. For evidence, animals from Europe are used in agriculture. Horses were used in combat. Food was cooked in new ways all through the Americas, and cultures grew from the spread of all of these things. These are all just pieces that you can use to build into your argument, right? So it mentions all of these things. One of the funnier comments is about pigs and says, you can throw pigs overboard and they'll figure out a way to survive in the ocean, and you can just pick them up on your way back. So it really talks about food throughout all of this kind of aspect. So you're going to kind of want to have to use that. But it also talks about horses being used in different ways, and also that culture grows from this, right? So it shows kind of how the cultures were structured. But it really is an agricultural heavy kind of paragraph document here. When it comes to your thesis part, if you also wanted to connect it and make it a little bit more vague at the beginning, and say that like Europeans brought, many different things, including, goods and services or things like that. Well, here you go, right? You can kind of tie it in with this part. For outside evidence, it said anything discussing agricultural techniques or uses for animals or crops not mentioned in the document would work as long as you tie it in with how it impacted the Native American population. For Europeans, this would also be a great time to say, hey, not everything was great. They brought things like smallpox also. And then 1 second here. So, like I said, this would be a great time to say, negative things were also brought over with Europeans, that they didn't just bring over all these goods and other things and people. They also, actually brought, diseases and other kind of horrible things with them as well. For document 3, when it comes to sourcing this document is from a Dominican priest and a book published in 1552. This is when Spain has domination over the silver trade in the Americas, and is justifying its rule by claiming to spread Christianity. The Spanish were not abiding by the very laws of the religion that they were claiming to spread, and this angered the church representatives and led to books and notes like this, condemning the Spanish for their actions being published. The audience in this case are the members of the church in Europe, and the note is written in such a way as to convey the Spanish as nothing more than slave trading greedy monsters. Right? That's really all that it's going after there. It's all that they are really kind of pointing out is, Spanish are not abiding by the rules of Christianity. They are being the, quote, savages in the group. So in terms of evidence, this document explains how the Spanish set up silver mines, used slave labor, used the excuse of spreading Christianity to take over the native population, and also how the social structure in Latin America was set up. That might be the best argument that you could make in terms of a lasting impact, is the fact that they set up a social structure that would remain for hundreds of years, establishing kind of a pyramid of power within there, right? So that would be kind of the most direct way to kind of use the evidence from here, but you could also look at some of the outside evidence points that are brought up here. So anything about the social structure that Spain set up in the Americas, like I said, or even anything to further explain how and why Spain's dominance in the silver trade affected the Americas. Right, so before this, they didn't necessarily care about the silver kind of there. They were looking for gold. Right, but once they found out just how much silver is in the Americas, Spain dominates the silver trade in the entire world. So this whole document is all about kind of the fact that this is a driving force, right? Spain starts trading in people as well as goods and services. So anything outside evidence-wise that identifies it back here, awesome. The important thing, though, is to tie it back to the Americas, though. So don't just identify how Spain ruled the world's silver market. Say how that impacted the Americas, right? So it's not enough to just say, oh, Spain dominated the world's silver and 80% of the silver in the world came from Spain. Cool, but how does that impact the Americas, right? You have to think back to the actual prompt and make sure that everything ties into that, right? So it has to all be about the Americas. It can't be about Spain the entire time. Document 4. So this document was written by a Peruvian noble, which means that it is a European living in Peru. This is evident by the way in which the official refers to different groups of people by their official racial name. This notice was meant to be a guide for the Spanish government, which is why it is detailed in regards to avoiding uprisings, but does not focus on the role of the natives. It focuses on the way in which conflicts can be avoided, right? So it was all about trying to just appease the locals by bringing in more slaves. Evidence that you can use during this part, using the racial and social hierarchy that this document emphasizes, is the most direct way to use the document. But you can also discuss the rise of the rebellious spirit from the native population that would persist after the time period. They have a revolution for a reason in Latin America outside of the time period, right? So using this document to kind of set that up and say that this is a creation of why there was rebellions, and to emphasize that part could also be a very good way to use this. When it comes to outside evidence, using the actual hierarchy chart for natives in Spain that we saw in our books from a long time ago, or you can find it online. It would be a great tool to use here. Another option would be to discuss the numbers of slaves imported and the impact of the slave trade on the Americas, right? So whenever you actually look at how the slave trade impacted everywhere in the Americas, even though in this document it's only talking about kind of Peru, you could use that same justification and reasoning to explain why slaves were brought into the United States even up through the 1700s. Right? Document 5. This document might have been a bit tricky. Remember that the prompt is all about the Americas, so saying where the silver is going or how it got there doesn't matter. It is all about saying how it left a lasting impact on the Americas. For sourcing, I have no idea where this came from or who made it. It was simply a map that worked for the documents, and I was like, yeah, using it. So sourcing is impossible for this map. There is no like time frame for who, what, where, when, or why it was made. It is simply a map that I pulled out of essentially the internet and just pulled it up, and I don't know where I got it from. It was just an image that was there. So if you source this document, I don't know how you did it. Evidence from the document. This document shows the silver trade, which allows you to tie it into previous documents when it comes to the importance of silver to the Europeans and how the mines and slavery left a lasting impact on the Americas, right? So you can talk about the fact that the mines kind of took away all of the resources and natural things that the Americas had going for them at the beginning, and also how slavery left a lasting impact on the United States even, but also all of Latin America. For outside evidence, much like in document 4, you could reference the amount of slaves brought over to the Americas, the way that the silver mines were run, or the amounts of silver that were taken out of the Americas, and kind of talking about all of those things. This is not all encompassing. This is just what I could think of and how I most directly saw this going, right? So if you have other things that you want to like get clarification on, once again, please stop by the office hours, talk to me. I will certainly help you out with anything that's possible. If I'm not in the Zoom office hours part, send me an Edsby message. Chances are I'm in a meeting with other people. Our department is having a meeting today, for example, at 1 o'clock. So I won't be in there right away, but I will be in there afterwards. Right? And that's the DBQ. Again, I put the scoring rubric at the bottom. Score yourself, throw it up on here. I'll put another prompt up for a poll for you to kind of put your scores, for you to see how everything went. But that is that for the DBQ part. Next thing that I need to cover, because there is another thing, because there's always just one more thing. The conference sign-up sheet. So I put like the link up to that on Edsby, and chances are you probably didn't get a chance to see it because I literally just posted it a little bit ago here. But I'm going to show you guys that now. So on Edsby, I posted the link to the Google form, to the Google form. Simply go on. You're going to put your first name, your last name, and what you want to talk about in your conference. I blocked out 15 minutes for everyone. No, that does not mean it will take us 15 minutes, but it does mean that chances are it's all spaced out enough that we'll all be okay here. So April 27th is here, 28th, 29th, and the 30th. So like Isaac has already claimed 2 o'clock on the 30th, right? So simply go in, put your name in, say what you want to talk about, and then you're good. You can kind of close the document and you're fine. If there's issues and people start deleting things and stuff like that, I get to see like who made edits and like where it was. So I'll see like who was actually there first. And as you can see, I made this at 2:30 in the morning because baby. If like you make changes and you erase somebody's stuff, I'll know. So don't. But essentially, this is just going to be your time to kind of sign in, talk to me about things, and just kind of gather what's going on, right? When you're in this conference part, this is a chance for us to talk about everything that is going on in here, your grade, all of your other stuff. We can kind of cover anything and everything that happens in here, right? So that's the conference sign-up sheet. I'm going to go ahead and close that out now. So without any further ado, I'm going to end the recording. I'm going to start taking questions from people. So if you have other questions and you did not tune in now to ask them, please simply send me your questions later and I will answer them happily.